So how and where do you get your news about politics?
My phone, obviously, will give me news updates. I don't watch any TV, any news sources. Big media outlets like CNN and Fox are often more harmful. Like, they've really just turned it into a big amusement show, it feels like, our lives and people's lives. So the news I often get through school, honestly, and through conversation with my classmates.
I spoke with Amanda last week. She's a registered libertarian in her mid-20s, living with her wife in the suburbs of Utah. She sat in her car to access the internet, which she chooses to not have at home. I appreciated her taking the time. Like a lot of working class people, she's got a busy schedule. She's taking classes to finish up her bachelor's degree while working 2 jobs 7 days a week. When you mentioned that your phone gives you news updates or notifications, what is the mechanism? Is it like Facebook? Is it like a...
It's like Times, the New York Times news headlines, generally.
Mm-hmm.
And like the Apple News headlines.
Yeah.
The Washington Post. I think I'm subscribed to those, just in the Salt Lake Tribune. So I will get their headlines and maybe read into them a little bit and then do my own little Google search if it's something that's been really heavily talked about and I want to at least understand enough. But my in-laws and my parents will listen to, and there's for sure Fox. There's people I know who will just leave it on their TV all day long, and they're working from home and maybe they'll mute it, but they're still seeing the flash of all of the news article titles and everything. And I think that just feeds their anger when they just are continually fed this narrative that's not necessarily accurate.
Amanda experiences daily tension in her conservative community, which is exacerbated by the media.
There's a lot of judgment around here and discrimination. There's pressures to conform, and I see that with my neighbors. I see that with my family, because the media has created such a civil war between our country, I think.
This is Shifting Terrain. I'm Rachel Rybaczuk, a working class sociologist and organizer. I've spent a long time thinking about race and class, most recently in politics. Today's fractured media landscape looks far different than it did even a decade ago. But like Amanda mentioned, Fox News is still one of the loudest voices in the room. In this episode, we'll talk with an expert, not only about Fox News, but how the liberal media is failing with working class people, how YouTube and podcasts are turning what started as entertainment into popular political news destinations, and why the culture war can't be sidestepped with facts. I'm talking with Reece Peck, associate professor at the CUNY Graduate Center and the College of Staten Island, and author of the book Fox Populism: Branding Conservatism as Working Class. Welcome, Reece.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to toss you a softball to start. Can you give me a general summary of your work?
Ooh, okay. I should be good at this by now. I have one of the few scholars out there that have written a full-length academic study on Fox News. I just felt like people were not taking this network seriously, and I grew up in Utah, and all my relatives watched Fox News, and I watched the kind of cultural influence it had on my family, particularly a family that's predominantly blue-collar and trades workers, and I wanted to solve that puzzle. So much of my work is to explain how the conservative movement, but really the conservative media, is able to resonate with working class people. They have a very deceptive and narrow representation of class, and we're going to get into that, a very stereotypical construction of what it means to be working class, but they do touch into powerful elements that are real, that there are texture, there is something that they're doing correct that I felt like either liberals were ignoring or looking down on, or just not, it didn't resonate with them at all because they don't live in those kind of blue-collar worlds.
It's not true that all working class people are Republican and conservative, right? And all left-leaning people are upper middle class or wealthy. A lot of left-leaning people are working class. So can you kind of tease that out a little bit?
It does skew your understanding of class and these kind of broader alignments politically, depending what region you come from, if it's urban, if it's rural, if it's a Midwestern state, All these things complicate your view. I mean, this is what conservative media, by the way, does so well. It makes you think conservatism is a proxy for being working class. It's like it's a badge of your class identity to be conservative. And that's one of the tricks that they pull constantly.
Do you have a specific or concrete example of how they accomplish that?
Yeah, so I'm always go back to country music. I think like my brother was a country singer, and Fox News, in the time of my study, country singers were pervasive. You know, they used country music to frame the Great Recession. John Rich had a song called Shutting Detroit Down in 2009 about embattled auto workers. And, you know, when there was all that talk about letting Detroit go bankrupt.
Yeah, while they're living it up on Wall Street in that New York City town, here in the real world, they're shutting Detroit down.
And they took a song that was literally about the plight of auto union workers to advance the Tea Party movement that was saying let Detroit go bankrupt, and was libertarian and was anti any policy that intervened to help people with the government, right? So it's like if you just looked at the lyrics of the song, it's just completely incoherent. There's no way this could be used to advance the Tea Party movement that wants a free market approach. But that misses the power of aesthetics, and that misses the power of culture. They were using the country music as a kind of class-coded identity appeal. And then it works. It somehow overwhelms whatever those policy contradictions are, or those ideological contradictions. It's just we associate that country singer, that brawny country singer with a Southern accent wearing a hat, with conservatism, white kind of conservatism, right?
Reese's 2009 example has a current counterpart. A little over a year ago, Oliver Anthony's song Rich Men North of Richmond was a viral sensation that reverberated through the political scene as a working man's anthem turned Republican political strategy. Drawing on the popular appeal of Anthony's lyrics, a clip of his song was played at the beginning of a Republican presidential debate. It was used as a segue into a question about why the song resonated with so many Americans. It was quickly adopted as a conservative Republican soundtrack critiquing Joe Biden.
These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just want to have total control. Want to know what you think, want to know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, 'cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, 'cause the rich men north of Richmond.
Anthony explained on his YouTube channel in August 2023 that the song had been weaponized and, quote, "The one thing that has bothered me is seeing people wrap politics up in this. I'm disappointed to see it. Like, it's aggravating seeing people on conservative news try to identify with me, like I'm one of them."
We have to grapple with the way that there is this powerful aesthetic, cultural dimension of class. You know, I always think about the opposite side of country music is why isn't hip hop, for example, treated as kind of a working class populist cultural resource, right? When it's consumed by mid-aged workers of all races, but it's obviously an African-American aligned music tradition. Why is that not seen as like a working class cultural symbol? Because its racial logic like overwhelms it. And then the class elements of it is erased. And liberals and conservatives participate in that.
If I'm hearing you correctly, what the person looks like, the song that's being played, can override. It's like powerful enough to get somebody to say, yes, I'm with you, Republican Party, because you're singing the song that I identify with or that speaks to my situation. And you're saying, like, that's enough to override somebody thinking about whether or not the policy they're being sold actually works for them.
What I would modify that is that it's not so much that they're convinced that the elite celebrity country singer is really working class like them, or there's really like them or the politician. It's more that that celebrity and that politician is representing them in that elite space. Like they're the champion. That's your fighter in that symbolic media space, right? In that political space. So I do want to I give working class a lot more intellectual credit. Like there's this idea that people are just like puppeted and, oh, he's having a beer and he's at the county fair and now I like him. You know, people are more sophisticated decoders of media than that. It's more of like, look, there's this media landscape. Who's speaking to me? Who's fighting for, I think, my side in that elite space? And if the liberals are not contesting it, just by the vacuum, you know, the right wing fills it, and then they plant the flag, and like, that's who's representing me. They're not being duped like, oh, you're just like me, but it's more of like a recognition politics, right? It's like who's being recognized in this space and who's not.
Well, that's interesting as I think about J.D. Vance, or even going back to George Bush, men who went to Yale, who had access to the most elite education and social networks as a result in this country, who then present themselves as a regular guy, like able to connect with either through accent or dropping different cues, like...
Right. So that's a big theme of my research, like the way in which they just systematically keep focusing on the cultural dimensions of class, and in doing that obscure the economic realities of class. And that fits in with the kind of broader free market kind of neoliberal argument that the people with power are the people that have cultural capital, not economic capital, right? It's the professors, it's the journalists, it's people that are driving the culture and shifting it in a weird foreign way that doesn't resonate with your traditional values and your blue collar like upbringing.
So I want to situate us at this point in history and culture. Can you explain very basically the landscape of news media and where people get their news about politics?
Yeah. I mean, I would just say, look, the media landscape for most of the 20th century was like very simple. Big networks, big radio networks, big TV networks, everyone watched them. The next critical radical shift was in the advent of cable television. And in the 80s and 90s. And then you get this nichification. It's no longer trying to speak to the largest audience. You're creating identity brands, people that love food, people that love history, people love sports, and then people that love conservative politics with Fox News. So that changed everything, right? That was a radical shift. But what we've witnessed since Trump, since 2016, is it was yet another radical transformation. People started cutting the cord on their cable news for economic reasons, it's too expensive, and turning to online video instead. I think we're watching yet another transformation. We're experiencing it. It's the rise of kind of the independent alternative media sector. The cable outlets are losing numbers day by day, even Fox. I mean, Fox is doing the best out of the big three, CNN, MSNBC, but they're bleeding audiences. And the independent YouTube podcasting sector is ascendant. They're getting larger and larger audiences. I mean, you see this in the current election with Trump doing this alt media strategy. He's going on podcasts like Eden Ross and Theo Vaughn, these kind of manosphere adjacent, young male audience targeted outlets in non-traditional media. Harris is kind of finally waking up to this. She went on a Call Me Daddy podcast recently. It's so clear that we're in the podcast election. Like podcasting has come into its own. And that old cable-centric like model is dying.
I'm wanting to broaden some of the perspective. How do you see race and class playing out in politics as well as in the media?
I think one thing that's seldom considered is that communication mediums can have class implications themselves. It's like whether you listen to talk radio versus cable television or read the New York Times, like they have class-based alignments to them, right? And I think YouTube and Facebook, they are more working class. That the majority of the consumers that get their news, not necessarily their news, but just consume YouTube content, are more working class, where something like Twitter X is like journalists, academics, politicos. So even our social media platforms can have class alignments to them. But YouTube is eclipsing, in terms of daily views, like mainstream television. I mean, I'm really interested, and again, terrified as someone that doesn't want to see Trump in power, to be honest. You know, you look at these channels where it's targeted for African-American men. They're like response videos. So a new song will come out and a bunch of boys will watch it, like young men in a couch. And then they started covering like political interviews, like they would watch debates. It started off as completely apolitical. And then they start watching CNN debates between liberals and pro-Trump people. And next thing you know, they're wearing MAGA hats and they're like, ride or die with Trump, you know? And you've seen Trump try to, I mean, he's always been like a fixture of like hip hop culture, like, you know, mentions of Trump in raps going back to the 80s and 90s is very common, but they're very intentional of like courting like reggaeton artists. Like we saw this in Pennsylvania with the Latino vote there. We saw drill rappers when he appeared in the Bronx rally. This is what I admire about the conservative movement. They're so bold. They're like, we're even going to take hip hop and try to like recode that. I mean, that's one thing that continues, a recurrent thing I see with the conservative movement.
To what degree is what you're saying reflecting a truth or a reality as opposed to a performance? Like, I also see clips of Fox News or MSNBC on social media, seemingly everywhere. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's effectively influencing people's opinions. So how do we measure the success of any particular media outlet or strategy?
Well, so there's been some really new, fascinating, cutting-edge research on YouTube. Political YouTube and apolitical YouTube is really a lot of the focus. And what this research is showing is that like there was one study done on Ben Shapiro, and this may blow your mind and my mind, but one of the things that drew people in was his voice. Half of his audience were ideologues, like they were conservative ideologues from the beginning, but the other half were, they enjoyed him as a rude commentator that like skewered people, and they liked his voice. And they show how like they even get into like how people consume it, like cooking, while people are cooking and doing chores. There's a part of this group that are non-ideologues, but over time, he becomes their main source of news. So what drew them in the beginning were these non-political qualities to the podcast or the show. He becomes a part of their regular ritual, their habit, and then they're relying on that person for news. Like, so they had a diversity of news sources, but it's people moving into only consuming one channel. So it's like there is data in research that shows people, again, to my point earlier in the discussion, it's the aesthetics. That's the first interface, that entertainment, that like, do I have a parasocial relationship with you? Are you interesting? Are you relatable? And then that can move into far more formalized ideological conclusions and also become like your media diet gets narrowed.
A message I keep hearing from people who are engaging voters is that most people don't trust the news. And it seems that at the same time, a lot of people trust some news. They find their narrow or specific source, and they absolutely trust that. And that seems to me to follow along patterns connected to race and class. Do you agree? What do you think about that?
Well, I think, look, if you stop talking to working class people, someone's going to fill that vacuum. And newspaper industry became a lot more class elitist in the 70s and 80s. They stopped doing labor beats. They moved more to subscription that only an affluent group of consumers could afford. They moved out of regions where they were once local papers. The internet did a doozy on this because it killed like wanted ads and things that could fund local papers. And then also like literally the profession of journalism used to be more of a working class profession. You'd get hard-boiled reporters that came up through a news organization from the ground up as paper boys or paper girls and could become a legit reporter eventually in their career, where at some point in the 70s and 80s, it becomes like straight pipeline from Ivy League schools into the major news outlets. So there's so many reasons, but my short answer is they stopped talking to working class people. They moved out of their worlds. Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, they fill that vacuum. And now YouTube. There's a good reason why working class people don't trust the news, because they abandoned them in a lot of ways. There is an elitist view, like an educated style. I call it, in my book, I call it the aspirational and middlebrow style. And a lot of working class people found that style patronizing, found that style fake. No matter how contrived, you have these conservative working class performers come in, at least they're offering a different cultural voice or a different style, right? That breaks from that middlebrow, educated NPR like voice that they don't identify with, right? A voice that actually will display emotion now and then, that actually will be self-deprecating, that will like do a lot of things that working class people recognize in their own culture. Use knowledge that's not just your credentials or your statistics, but like your family biography, referencing what happened to your lived experience. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why the mainstream news field turned working class people off, but those are some of them. I mean, some of the most popular news is local TV to this day. And that makes a lot of sense because that's actionable information. They're talking about when the high school football game is going to happen. And they talked about, something being shut down in your local community, flood warnings, weather, all these things are like very immediate, practical information. And that's why local news has not taken the hit that cable and other kind of sectors of the news industry have taken.
I know your research focused primarily on Fox News, but have you studied or noticed local news becoming more partisan or infiltrated by a similar kind of conservatism?
First off, yes, the Sinclair Broadcasting Corporation, there was that infamous, I don't know if you saw it when it went viral, where they had all their anchors repeat the same script about like objectivity and political correctness and propaganda. You got to watch it. It's like very dystopian, where they're all at the end of the local news broadcast repeating a kind of right-wing talking point, kind of anti-mainstream media.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
So that's real, that like Sinclair Group have a strong influence over local news at this point, and they're injecting more and more partisan debate and talking points that we'd associate with like cable news. The second thing is that even in its purest like heyday, local news would inject all types of racist ideological content. You can't blame Fox for creating racism. Like if you look at local news in the 80s, and there's been great studies on this, the anchor would say crime, and behind that anchor are pictures of people of color. Right. So like they're never explicitly saying any and welfare. Like they don't need to say black people or African-American people, Latino Americans, but code words they use. Traditional values is a big one, loaded with kind of racial significance. Urban, like they use these code words. And that was when they weren't even part of a concerted, intentional like movement, like political movement. That was just baked in hegemonic kind of racism that would seep out into the news culture.
So something that we've focused on in a previous episode is the rural-urban divide. And people consistently point to the media as a reason for persistent stereotypes about working-class voters and political polarization. This is not news to you. For example, in terms like rural-urban divide and pitting coastal elites against the vast middle of the country, why does the media rely on these messages? What do you think they're trying to accomplish?
I think the media, the news media, as I show in my book, has definitely been invested in this mapping, on creating a certain mapping about the coastal elites versus the heartland. There's a great book called Heartland Television by Victoria Johnson, and this stems even with network sitcoms and, strategies. At some era, everyone is heralding the heartland as the center of goodness and real Americana. And then at another historical juncture, it's everything that's wrong with America, backward, sexually deviant, criminal, uneducated. And so the value of the heartland or the rural, it fluctuates and it's politically mobilized by different groups in different moments. But at least in the 90s, 80s, 90s forward, Fox News was very conscious about claiming to be the network for the heartland. And then liberal MSNBC leaned in for coastal upper middle class educated viewers. I mean, they had the coffee shop. The early sets showed high-tech computers, right, that you associate with more upper class people, a chic coffee shop with the brick exposed, right? So their brand was very consciously concretizing and reinforcing this kind of generic, superficial kind of mapping of what the heartland is like or what the coasts are like. What does that do? Well, on the liberal side, it paints a picture of urban life where working class people are invisibilized, as if there isn't a working class reality of urban life. So that's one thing that it does. It's problematic. And then on Fox News, it completely invisibilizes people of color in rural areas, like as if the rural places are homogeneously white. Like I grew up in Utah and everyone assumes that it was like my high school was so white, but I grew up in downtown Salt Lake City and we had at least 30% of my high school were Chicano, Polynesian, African-American. Like my neighborhood was multi-ethnic. Like I met people speaking Spanish. My experience was more diverse, and a lot of other people that I talked to in the big cities, they went to private schools and it was very not mixed, even though they're like in the city. They have very white, homogeneous, like actual neighborhoods.
So in closing, do you have a vision for the news media? Having studied it, do you have not even a necessarily prescription, but like What needs to change in news media?
My big thing is that I just wish we could, this focus on disinformation and this what I call like an infocentric conceptualization of news is limiting. It's not that we shouldn't fight for facticity, and that shouldn't still be a value that like liberals and leftists refuse to ever abandon, that you stay wedded to objective truth and good research. And I never abandon that. But there's always this assumption that to be compelling and entertaining and engaging is mutually exclusive to being factual and doing good research. I don't think they are. And I think that for the last 10 years, there's been so much money dumped into nonprofits on misinformation, disinformation, and that's how we're going to stop Trump, and that's how we're going to stop these reactionaries on YouTube. And it's been mostly shown to be toothless because it misrecognizes the true source of the right's power. It's not simply that they lie and they manipulate algorithms. It's that they have cultural authority. And until you solve the problem of understanding where they gained their cultural authority, you will never challenge them. There's no regulatory fix. There's no technical device that you can use, no court battle that you're going to win. It's like this retreat into these kind of elite forms of change always by the kind of liberal side and not battle it out in the public sphere to actually gain bigger audiences. Broaden your strategy, right? Broaden the strategic options that you can imagine on combating the kind of far right. Don't always fall back into it's just information, it's just education.
So we need a throwdown, basically.
No throwdown. That's exactly right. There's no way around the culture war, my friends. There's only one way, right through it. No matter your fantasies to wish away the culture war, I think that's wishful thinking.
Well, I do wonder if people really did have their, not just their needs met in the most basic way, but in a way where people were materially comfortable, how much of that would actually calm down.
Yeah.
You know? Because it is people's desperation or their anxiety about, frankly, getting old and dying without enough food or medication, medical care, housing, I think really freaks people out. I think more and more people are squeezed and they're just anxious and terrified. And so it's easy to distract folks with stories about the other on a cultural level, on an identity level. And this like over-reliance of the right on these terrifying ideas that people are going to be left destitute.
Yeah.
And alone. And they're going to be destitute and alone because of economic policies by the rich, not because of immigrants.
Yeah.
We have no social safety net anymore. Republicans are going to make sure Social Security just unravels completely, right?
Yeah. But the thing that they do, though, is that the type of like anti-capitalist, the flirtations of the right that I'm seeing right now is speaking to what you're talking about. You wouldn't see that unless material conditions have gotten so bad where even the right feels the need to absorb some left talking points about wealth inequality, right? And about corporate power. But the maneuver is, yes, you understand corporations dominate your life. The economy is rigged. But boom, it's the immigrants. It's the 1-2. I guess that's the key. You can't understand the anti-immigrant rhetoric in isolation to the other thing they're doing at the left hand, right? That's what their right hand is doing. But in the left hand, that's why it's so powerful. This is true that corporations dominate your world and that rich people dominate your world. But then it's mixed in with this false idea that immigrants create all the crime and they're taking your jobs, and completely empirically, there's no basis to it, right? That's the only thing I would add to that, is that it's that double move that they're always doing.
Reece's analysis of Fox News and media broadly reveals not only the way it presents race and class in politics, but how our media itself is raced and classed. It's not simply sharing information about events. It's communicating norms about culture and community. Where do we belong? Who are our people? Do we find them reflected back at us on the news, YouTube, or within a political party? Where do we go from here in a messy political landscape made more confusing by multiple media forces pulling at our attention? In the next episodes, we'll come to understand the experience of politicians who are working class and in the minority relative to their affluent counterparts, and how organizers are building a powerful working class solidarity well beyond this election. That's coming up on Shifting Terrain. If you like what you've heard, please follow the show and share it with someone you know. Shifting Terrain was executive produced by Amanda Cowper and myself, Rachel Rybaczuk, production consulting and audio mixing by Karen Given, associate producer is Emilce Quiroz, music by BlueDot Sessions. Thank you to our guests, Reece Peck and our voter, Amanda. And a special thank you to eMedia. See you after the presidential and all those down-ballot elections.